Hello, this is lesson 4.6. Today we'll subtract mixed numbers that require borrowing. Not all questions that are subtraction require borrowing, so we're going to be prepared for borrowing each time and we'll see some strategies that we can use. For this lesson, we're going to always find the lowest common denominator of our fractions first, so this way we can decide, do we need to borrow or not? Because it's really important with, I think, all fractions to not touch the whole numbers until we've changed the fractions to be like fractions. Then we can see, do we need to borrow or can we subtract our fractions just the way they are? So these are the steps we're going to follow. First of all, we're going to find the lowest common denominator of our fractions. Then we're going to change any unlike fractions to like fractions. If we need to borrow, we will. Then we'll subtract our whole numbers, and then we'll subtract the numerators of our like fractions, and finally we'll check to see if our answer is in lowest terms. So let's take a look at this first question. We have 7 1/5 minus 4 3/4. This question's not in your book, so you can write this down on a piece of paper and pause the video, and then we'll work through it together. So right away we see that we have unlike fractions, 5 and 4. So we're going to find our lowest common denominator of 5 and 4, and that is 20. So first up, I'm going to change the fractions before I even look to subtract the whole numbers. So I'm going to multiply my first fraction by 4 to raise the terms, and my second fraction by 5. And then I'll rewrite underneath. So I'll have 7 4/20 minus 4 15/20. So now we can see we're in a situation where we are going to need to borrow, because 4 minus 15 will take us into the negatives and we're not dealing with negative numbers. So we're going to borrow from the 7, making that a 6, and the 1 that we took away is expressed as 20/20. So we learned this in lesson 4.5. With this lesson, with mixed numbers, we need to add an additional step, which is to add on the 4/20 above, because 6 20/20 is equal to 7, but remember there's a 4/20 there. So this will actually become 6 24/20 minus 4 15/20. Of course, we don't need to change anything about our second mixed number because we're going to be subtracting. So now we can subtract our whole numbers and our numerators. So 6 minus 4 is 2, and 24 minus 15 is 9. And so we have 2 9/20. And we check our answer, is our fractional part in lowest terms? And in this case it is. So my final answer here is 2 9/20. So let's solve these equations. First up, we're going to see that we have two mixed numbers that are being subtracted, and they are unlike fractions. So we're going to make them like. Lowest common denominator of 9 and 3 is 9. So we only have to change our second fraction. So we're going to do that first, and we're going to rewrite 17 4/9 minus 12 6/9. 4 minus 6 is not possible, so this is where we're going to need to borrow. So we take 1 away from 17, that becomes 16, and we create our fraction for the 1, so that will be 9/9. Remember, we use the denominator that we have. And then we have to add on that 4/9. So we're going to have 16 13/9. When we do that step, now we can subtract away the 12 6/9. So we're going to take 16 minus 12, whole number minus whole number. 16 minus 12 is 4. And now numerator minus numerator. 13 minus 6 is 7 over 9. And that answer is in lowest terms. So for number 1, we have 4 7/9. For number 2, we have a 4 and a 5 again. We've seen this before. So our lowest common denominator is 20, so we'll have to change each of them. First one multiply by 5, second one multiply by 4, and we're going to rewrite. So we'll have 16 and 15 twentieths minus 13 and 16 twentieths. Now these ones all require borrowing today, but there's lots of times where you would end up with fractions that you could just easily subtract with no borrowing required. So keep that in mind. Until you change the fractions, you don't know if you need to borrow or not. So 15 minus 16, that's not possible, so we're going to borrow from the 16 here, taking it down to 15 and making the 1 of the fraction, right? 20 twentieths is equal to 1. So 15 and 20 twentieths is the same thing as 16. And then we need to remember to add that 15 twentieths. So that's going to be 15 and 35 twentieths minus 13 and 16 twentieths. Now we can subtract whole number minus whole number. 15 minus 13 is 2, and 35 minus 16 is 19 over 20. And again, our answer is in lowest terms, but we always want to be sure, is our final answer in lowest terms? I'd like to do a few more exercise questions with you. The first 3, what we're going to do is just estimate. They already have common denominators, so some of these don't require borrowing at all. So we can see 2 and 7/8 minus 1 and 3/8. We're not going to need to borrow, but let's do the rounding part to practice that. So for number 1, we're going to estimate this. 2 and 7/8 rounds up to 3. Remember, our requirement is the fraction has to be at half or higher. And then 1 and 3/8, 3 out of 8 is not at half, so that's going to round down to 1. And that will equal 2 for the estimate. For the actual, 2 minus 1 is 1, and 7 minus 3 is 4 over 8. And then we will need to reduce this fraction to lowest terms. So our actual will be 1.5, and our estimate will be 2. For number 2, again, you can see we don't need to borrow. Common denominator, 3 minus 1, we're all good there. So you don't always have to borrow. So 15 and 3/4 for an estimate, we're going to round that up to 16. And 12 and 1/4, that's not halfway, so that's going to round down to 12. So we should be getting an answer close to 4. 15 minus 12 is 3. And 3 minus 1 is 2 out of 4, and it's the same as the previous one. We're going to get that reduced to half. So we'll have 3.5 as our actual answer. And number 3, just to show again, if we have like fractions, we're happy, saves us work. And 7 minus 3 for the fraction is possible, so there's no need to borrow here. What we can do is estimate the answer though. 8 and 7/10 rounds to 9, and 2 and 3/10, that's not rounding up, that's going to stay as a 2. So our estimate is going to be 7, and now we can solve our actual. 8 minus 2 is 6, and 7 minus 3 is 4 over 10, and we can reduce this fraction. Both of these numbers are divisible by 2, so we're going to divide both numerator and denominator by 2, and we'll end up with 6 and 2/5. For number 4, we'll just do the estimate. Number 5 will do the estimate and the actual, and number 6 will do the estimate. All of these ones, 4, 5, and 6, and many of them in the exercise, they do require lowest common denominator before you can determine if you need to borrow. Let's just do the estimate for number 4. I don't think you have to estimate every single one, but if you do every second or third one, it's good practice for you. So 13.5 is going to round up to 14, and 1 3/9 This one's not at halfway, 3 right, 6 wrong. That's the way I look at it. So that's going to round down to 1. So you should be getting an answer that's fairly close to 13. Remember, lowest common denominator in order to solve the actual. For number 5, we see that we've got 14 1/3. So for the estimate, I'm going to round down to 14. And 11 5/6, I'm going to round 11 up to 12. So our estimate answer is around 2. If I want to solve the actual, 3 and 6 have a lowest common denominator of 6, so I only need to change this first fraction. So this will be 14 2/6 minus 11 5/6. We can see now that 2 minus 5 is not possible, so we're going to borrow. 14 becomes 13 6/6 plus the 2/6. We have to remember that step. That gives us 13 8/6 minus 11 5/6. And now we can subtract whole number minus whole number. 13 minus 11 is 2, and numerator minus numerator. 8 minus 5 is 3/6. Now this answer is not in lowest terms, so be careful. Always need to look to reduce. Both of these numbers are divisible by 3, so our final answer is 2.5. For number 6, let's just do the estimate. You can see that they're unlike fractions, so they will need to change. But if we want to look at the rounded values, 16 1/4 rounds to 16, and 12 3/8 rounds to 12. So our answer is going to be close to 4. The last question we'll look at is number 7, where we have 6 and 8 as our denominators. So our lowest common denominator of 6 and 8 is 24. So we're going to be multiplying our first fraction by 4 and our second fraction by 3. So this will give us 13 4/24 minus 2 21/24. We can see now that 4 minus 21 for the fraction is no good. I need to borrow from the 13. So I make the 13 12, and the 1 is the 24/24, and I add on that 4/24. And whether you do that adding step on paper or mentally, that's up to you. But remember, the more organized you are and the more work you show to yourself, the better it is for when you've made a mistake. You can find your mistake more easily. So that gives us 12 28/24 minus 2 21/24. And now we're in a position where we can subtract everything. 12 minus 2 for the whole numbers is 10, and 28 minus 21 is 7/24. And that's going to be in lowest terms.